This video is about the hormones and the menstrual cycle. It's particularly aimed at A and A star students in terms of the level of detail we look at. First thing we need to do is remind ourselves of the names of the parts of the female reproductive system. So here we have the uterus labelled, the ovary where the eggs will come from, the vagina where the eggs will pass out of if they're not fertilised, and the oviduct or fallopian tube. The egg itself is inside a follicle in the ovary. What we're going to do is look at what happens in the womb during the menstrual cycle. So we start off at day 1. In day 1 to day 5, that's when menstruation happens, so that's when a woman's period happens and the lining of the uterus is shed. Then between days 5 and 14 the uterus lining builds up again in preparation to receive a fertilized egg. The egg is released from a follicle on day 14 and moves down the oviduct into the uterus in a few days, and if it is fertilized, that egg will implant into the uterus lining. If it's not fertilized, the egg will die and pass out of the uterus and out of the vagina. Over the next 7 days or so, the uterus lining thickens further, but by day 28, if there has not been conception, if the egg has not embedded in the uterus lining, then the menstruation cycle repeats, the uterus lining breaks down, and we're back to the beginning of the cycle through to day 5. The next thing we want to look at is how the ovary and the follicle in the ovary are influenced during this cycle. So looking over the same time frame, we see the egg here is maturing in the follicle from day 1 to day 5. It actually then grows in size between day 5 and day 14 to become fully mature, ready to release the egg. So the egg is released on day 14, and the egg, as we mentioned, travels down the oviduct into the uterus. Now what is left behind is an object called the yellow body. The yellow body releases hormones that affect the menstrual cycle. If the egg is not fertilized, the yellow body then breaks down by day 28 and another follicle matures as the start of the new cycle begins. This is now where the complexity comes in. We're going to look at the hormones that are released by the pituitary into the blood. The two hormones that we're going to look at are follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, and luteinizing hormone, LH. You can just call them by their initials, don't try to learn the words if that's complicated. So at the beginning of the cycle, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone levels are fairly low. There's a peak from luteinizing hormone at the stage of ovulation and a small peak in the level of follicle stimulating hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone, as its name suggests, is responsible for getting a follicle to develop, so that's done its main job by now. There we see the egg released from the follicle at the peak of luteinizing hormone production. So luteinizing hormone has triggered ovulation, the level then drops, and both hormones continue at a low level until the end of the cycle. Then follicle stimulating hormone rises again to trigger the maturation of another follicle. So let's now look at the production of estrogen by the ovary and the action of the hormone. At the beginning of the cycle, estrogen levels are low and follicle stimulating hormone levels have increased at this point. Once the follicle is developing, estrogen levels rise, and that decreases the level of follicle stimulating hormone. The estrogen is responsible for the reparation of the uterus lining. At ovulation, estrogen levels drop because luteinizing hormone has caused ovulation to happen. The estrogen levels were high and raise again at this point to stop more follicle stimulating hormone being produced, but at around about day 24 the estrogen level drops, and that allows more follicle stimulating hormone to be produced, which causes the next follicle to mature. Also in this session we'd like to look at progesterone levels. The yellow body produces progesterone, so that helps you to remember that there's no progesterone in the first parts of the cycle. There won't be any until after the ovulation step. So we get to day 14 here, we get ovulation, then we get the production of the yellow body. The yellow body produces progesterone, and that hormone prepares the body for pregnancy. So it maintains and further thickens the uterus lining, but if there is no conception, if the egg hasn't been fertilized, the yellow body disappears, and therefore progesterone levels will fall again. Just to complete the cycle, we have the return to day 5 after menstruation with progesterone levels at a low level. Look at the graph, try to remember each part independently. The key parts are the peak of luteinizing hormone at ovulation, FSH levels high at day 5 to encourage the development of the follicle, estrogen levels high just before ovulation and then afterwards, and progesterone levels high after ovulation until the yellow body disappears. If pregnancy occurs, then both estrogen and progesterone levels are maintained at the level they are around about day 24.